2025 will go down in booktube history as the year I was unable to put together a best of ranking for the books I read that year. Like no top 10, no top 6 even. I just couldn't do it. They weren't amenable to it. I tried putting them, but like honestly, even if there was just no way, right? They just didn't want to match up together, these books. It was kind of a weird reading year, I would say. Kind of bad in a way because like I didn't read so much, and even though I did read a lot from some very favorite authors of mine, those books were still like kind of 4 out of 5 stars. So, great, but not the knock me out of the park kind of brilliance that I really expect from those writers. So anyway, we're doing something different. I'm doing the awards format, which I've seen on other booktube channels. I think maybe one of the times that I saw it and thought it was really, really great was on Anna Marie's channel, Actual Spinster. I'll link it down below. But yeah, basically I was completely unable to rank these standout books of the year, but at the same time, I do want to talk about them, so this format seems like the best kind of compromise. So without further ado, let's begin. The first award is for Gayest Monster in 2025, and the runner-up place goes to Geryon, the monster in Autobiography of Red by Anne Carson. This is a retelling of a Greek myth where Heracles has to go for one of his labors to an island to kill a monster called Geryon and steal his cattle. And Carson has adapted that into free verse and also like magical realismed it up by having Geryon be not only a red monster but also a kind of ordinary modern day introverted teenage boy, and Heracles being the extrovert, handsome bad boy that Geryon is falling hard for. There's also a lot of abstract stuff about photography and time and volcanoes, and they go to Peru at one point, which is unexpected and great, and yeah, represent. But, we're really here for the gay angst and yearning. But the prize goes to Volume 1 of The Summer Hikaru Died, the popular manga series by Mokumoku Ren. We have 2 teenage boys living in the Japanese countryside, one of them brooding introvert, main character whose name I don't remember, the other one kind of goofy class clown guy who's called Hikaru. And they're just kind of joking and making stupid jokes together at the first scene, right? And then main character asks, hey, you're not really Hikaru, are you? Turns out his best friend Hikaru went off to the mountains one day, and ever since he came back, there was something a little bit off about him, and we found out immediately that Hikaru died, and his body was, or his shape or form was taken over by some yokai or mountain spirit or goblin or something like that. So I think the normal way to tell this story would be to focus on withholding that reveal to build tension, have lots of characters saying something's off about Hikaru and ever since he went to the mountains, and like this kind of build up, right? And by just skipping all that kind of paranoid invasion of the body snatcher jazz and getting straight to the, yeah, he's dead and got replaced by a monster, this story is able to focus less on plot and more on processing and also like living with something or coexisting with something unpleasant, which is a very psychological thing because really it's about grief and regret. The broody main character would rather live with a fake monster Hikaru and pretend that things are just the same as they've always been, rather than face the reality that his best friend, and we can quickly assume his beloved, is gone forever. Also worth noting that the monster has access to Hikaru's memories, so we can quickly understand that both of these boys had romantic feelings for each other, which they were never able to express directly, which makes sense, given that they're best friends and that they're both men. I found this first volume does lean quite heavily on genre conventions, but the blend does work very well. So, if you're looking for sad boy, queer horror romance, then you could do a lot worse. Speaking of things that are worse, the next award goes to Worst Husband of the Year. The runner-up prize goes to Jason from Medea by Euripides. Jason is just so terrible. Basically, the play begins and Jason is leaving Medea, his wife, to marry the princess of the kingdom where they're currently staying, Corinth. Jason is great in this play because he does make some quite reasonable and sympathetic arguments while at the same time coming across as male trash. Despite not being the main character, in a way he's kind of like the tragic hero of the play, I think, because while Medea is kind of conflicted and she is definitely the main character, her whole thing is that she says, I'm gonna go on a murderous rampage to get revenge and hurt him as much as possible, and she does do that. Whereas Jason is kind of blind. He has a tragic flaw where he doesn't realize just how far Medea will go to punish him, and then he has the moment at the end where he realizes his mistake and then he feels very sad. So that's kind of like what a normal tragic hero would be. I think if this play was written by Sophocles, Jason would have had a much bigger role in it, and also Aristotle probably would have liked it a lot more than he did. But since it's Euripides, we get a feminist masterpiece. Jason is scum, no complaints. The winner of Worst Husband of 2025 though, well, it's actually a tie-up. It's a tie between Hans from The Black Spider by Jeremiah Scott Helf and Guy from Rosemary's Baby by Ira Levin. Two terrible men who both do kind of similarly terrible things and quite satanic things to their wives and their unborn children. Now, I do avoid spoilers in most of my videos, but to explain this one, I do have to get into some spoiler territory. I think kind of mild. Like, I think a lot of people know what Rosemary's Baby is about, like from the film and stuff like that. And this one, I don't think it like really destroys the book if you know any particular moment of the plot. But yeah, spoilers nonetheless. So if you want, then skip to the next bit in the video. In The Black Spider, we have a village that decides at some point to sacrifice the first child that's born in that village to Satan, because they think that will stop their problems, because Satan is terrorizing their village with black spiders. I mean, there's a whole thing. But anyway, they're all after this baby that's about to be born, right? And the husband, the father to be, who's called Hans, his wife isn't given a name, but he kind of goes along with this. He kind of wants everyone to be happy. He doesn't want to do anything too sacrilegious, but he also doesn't want Satan to be unhappy. He doesn't want the villagers to, doesn't want to cause trouble for the villagers, but also at the same time, he doesn't want to upset his wife. And when his wife asks him to go get a priest to christen the baby, he'll do what she said, knowing that that will give the villagers time to do whatever it is that they want to do. And that way, in his mind, he'll be, doing what his wife said, but at the same time, if things happen while he's away, then it's none of his business. I wouldn't say this is a very psychological book, but like we do really get into Hans's head to see his reasoning. And it's interesting, like he's one of the only characters that has a name in the whole book, right? So I think God Help really wanted us to focus on how people can kind of rationalize themselves to do really, really scummy things. Like after we get the kind of humble, rational thought processes of Hans, the narrator jumps in and says, in this way, the poor woman was sold, right? So this guy is saying that Hans sold his wife to the devil, right? And their unborn child. Whereas in Rosemary's Baby, spoilers incoming, Guy, the husband of Rosemary in America 1960s, 1969, I think it is, he literally does pimp his wife to the devil, right? Like he to help his acting career, he gets his wife involved with a group of Satanists so that the devil, while she's drugged, the devil can actually rape her, impregnate her, and then the child won't be hers when she has it, right? Just so he can have a successful career. So like it doesn't really get much worse than that. Guy is definitely, while I think that both of these men are terrible, Guy is the more dislikable one because a lot of this book is about trust and like losing trust. And Rosemary is just kind of like quite a naive, trusting person at the beginning of the book, to the point that you're kind of like getting frustrated with her and like, come on, Rosemary. But like by the end of it, she's clocking things. But, she always trusts her husband, Guy. And like, as we start to lose trust in him, it's all the more heartbreaking to see how the person that she loves so much. And this connects to Medea as well, because she's also kind of cut ties with her family and doesn't have many friends in the city. Is it New York? I think it's New York where they're living, right? Now that I'm thinking about it, like I kind of feel like this is number one, but they're both terrible. I mean, like you shouldn't give your wife's unborn child to the devil. It's just it's not done. It's kind of weird that I read about that same specific horrible thing in two different books from two different countries and time periods. But like I said, it's been a weird reading year. The next award goes to Most Impressive Knowledge of Shelf and Aisle Layout in a Supermarket, and this award goes to Natsumi in Mild Vertigo by Mieko Kanai. There's like, I think 2 sections which are, pages and pages of her just thinking about, well, I need to do the groceries, and then she's thinking about the supermarket, and then she's listing the different items on the shelves like next to each other. And it goes on for a long time. It's kind of like a sutra or like a meditation, you know what I mean? Like you just get into like a rhythm of the words, the products, and like she goes through all the fish, then she moves on to all the meats, then she gets onto, it's like kind of, it's got this structure and flow, which is actually really impressive, like that it can be made like an interesting read. I'm glad it's not like that for the whole book. I've read like comparisons between this and that one, Ducks Newburyport, which if it's like that all the way through, I guess I don't really want to read it, because while I really enjoyed it in this book, I guess like the fact that it's not the whole book, and that the fact that it's only for like little moments, like twice basically, that's enough basically. There's enough supermarket layout information for me. But I did really like this book. Mieko Kanai is one of my all-time favorite writers. This was one of those 4-star all-time favorite writer books that I read this year. As well as the kind of the supermarket layouts, you can see there's just blocks and blocks of text, hardly any paragraph breaks in this book, let alone sentence breaks. God, you want the end of a sentence, you better look somewhere else because Miyako Kanai doesn't want to give it to you. It's kind of like about ennui and like daily life, and it's this Japanese housewife just existing and kind of, you know, getting into these monotonous things of existence and like the frustration, I guess, of that, and occasionally these little pinpricks of something else like bursting through like the horrible monotony of daily life. Like in the first chapter, it's just she's looking at the water running out of the tap, and that kind of punctures this sort of litany of just stuff and you know, chores and things that take up the rest of the chapter. The impressive thing is the sort of like the rhythmic prose and the way that like when you read some of these really long passages, you get this sense of escalation and that it's building. And I wanted to read it aloud to myself quite a lot. This is what some books they feel better when you read them aloud. Like I read something and then I'd read it again out loud just to get the power of it, you know? I don't get that with a lot of books, but this was definitely one of them. Next up is the award for Best Book as Travel Companion, and that is Anecdotes by Heinrich von Kleist. You can see a guy in a forest on the cover there. I actually love this cover. I think I talked about it in another video when I just liked it, but like, especially now that it's been a travel companion for me, I've grown to really love it. Like as an object, like some books as objects just have power. This one does because I took it with me to Cambodia. I was on like a couple of sleeper buses where I would be squashed in this coffin-like space for the night with the sound of the engine underneath me and like my boots over here, my backpack over there, and this book like next to me all the time. A book like that, you know, it just accumulates vibes, especially when it's a book like this, a book which is just full of anecdotes. I picked it deliberately for traveling because it is like a series of sometimes only like page long little stories like that. One paragraph, one sentence, one page, kind of like the opposite of Miyako Kanai. We get really, really short, separate anecdotes with names like The Ancient Festivities of Parliament or The Battle of the Blind Against the Pig. This guy, Heinrich von Kleist, one of my all-time favorite writers, started a tabloid, and in that tabloid, sometimes to fill space, he would fill in as the editor, like just little bits of text, and he would write anecdotes, which were sometimes real things, sometimes fictional things, sometimes real things that he'd fictionalized. So they're all kind of mixed up here, and they're interesting because on the one hand, they have that kind of tabloidy feel of sensationalism. On the other hand, they're also like, you know, they need to be a bit pithy. They need to tell a story in a short amount of time that can grab someone's interest, but at the same time, you know, be finished in the amount of space that he needed to take up in that particular edition of the journal. So in a way, sometimes it's a bit like reading the news. Like you get the sense of an event being reported, and it doesn't have that narrative sense of there being a beginning, a middle, and an end. So it'll just be, oh, there were these people and they had a fight in a street in this town in so-and-so in Germany, and this guy got his teeth knocked out, and that's it. You know, something being reported. So in a way, there's like a lack of narrative satisfaction with a lot of these, and some of them just don't really land for me. But at the same time, you're getting a focus not on narrative, but on like just the craft of the writing. And he is a brilliant writer. So this has definitely been elevated to the status of a treasured book. Next, the award for Most Thought-Provoking Gnomes of the Year goes to The Gnomes in Diggers by Terry Pratchett. This is the second in the trilogy. I could have also called it the best post-apocalypse of the year, because the first book, Truckers, which I talked about in my last year's best of the year thing, is about a kind of an apocalypse in the sense that a bunch of gnomes live in a department store and the department store gets torn down. So there's sort of the, how do we convince this society that the world that they believe has these walls is actually quite limited, and that there is an outside to the world that they knew before that world gets torn down and demolished. So in the sequel, the gnomes are now living in the outdoors, and winter is coming, along with all the dangers that winter would bring for people who don't know what winter is. This is a slower and more thoughtful book than the first one, which fits the setting and the atmosphere. Also because of the sort of gnome time means that even though not much time for us has passed since the events of the first book, the gnomes have aged. They live quicker than we do. So the characters, you know, even though it's their first winter, you know, so it's been less than a year since the events of the first book, but they've all aged quite a lot because of their lifespans. And there's like a new generation of young gnomes who don't really remember what life was like back in the department store. So there's like a weariness to the main characters, which also fits this setting of, you know, what do you do after the big revolution? What do you do after the big event has happened and you just need to kind of keep everyone on board and keep everyone happy and survive the best you can. All the things that I loved about the first book are still there. It's still extremely funny. It's got a great kind of children's adventure story and really amazing like socio-political / philosophical analysis. But in this one, I do feel that those things sometimes kind of get in the way of each other, in a way that like maybe if you were a child reading it, some of the adult stuff would bog it down. And if you're an adult reading it, like you want some of the kind of easy adventure stuff to just get out of the way. So we have the character of Grimma, who like really comes into her own in this book, who is like essentially like a kind of revolutionary feminist who is stuck trying to lead an essentially conservative society of gnomes. There's this great quote: "The world was quite difficult enough as it was without people going around trying to make it better all the time," which is one of my favorite Terry Pratchett quotes now. Her character is amazing, and her growing despair is really fascinating and really moving and engaging, and I just wanted more of that. I wanted more despair, but it is a children's book at the end of the day. And I think you kind of feel Terry Pratchett coming up against the limits of like what he's able to do, not only with the kind of the world he's created and the characters he's created, but also like kind of the genre and like his ambitions for like kind of some of the philosophical stuff that's in this. It does feel like he's kind of scraping against the limits of what's possible. But you know, that said, he actually goes there, and which is amazing. It's still a 5-star and one of the best books of the year. It's also the runner-up for the next prize, which is best winter book, because like I said, like this is a lot about winter, and it's just fun to read about the gnomes like experiencing it for the first time. Like they're kind of panicked and scared that the ground is getting harder and like white stuff is coming from the sky, and it's all strange and scary, which is, you know, charming and funny to read, while also you can kind of see where they're coming from. But the actual winner of the best winter book is The True Deceiver by Tove Jansson. This is a book set in a cold, snowy village with beautiful descriptions of like the winter and the snow and the people's kind of like sometimes warm, sometimes icy demeanor towards each other. And you get like a great sense of that community life, which is like a big part of why this is very cozy to read in the winter. But at the same time, it's about two characters, one called Katri, who's kind of an outcast in the village. Like her parents, her mother died and her father was a foreigner, I think. So like, or at least he wasn't from their village, right? So she's grown up with her brother, and she also has yellow eyes, and like there's things about her which just make her different from everybody. And we begin kind of like shifting into her perspective a little bit, and we know that she has decided she is going to get the wealth of an old woman who lives in the village called Anna. And that is like kind of the plot of the story, right? Like, how is she going to acquire that wealth? And the other main character is the old woman, Anna, who is a writer. She writes children's books, and she draws the pictures always of spring, which is important for the book, that she can't really draw anything because it's winter, right? But normally she draws spring pictures, and to write the stories, she has these little characters who are like little rabbits with flowers on them. And because of the rabbits with the flowers on them, her books have become extremely popular children's books all over the world. And she's always having to deal with like the rights, you know, for the characters and so on and so forth. So it's impossible to know that and read that and not think that Tove Jansson is doing something, if not autobiographical, then at least kind of caricaturing her own experience as the creator of the Moomins. So that like kind of personal aspect is really fascinating if you're interested in Tove Jansson's work, as I am. I think the thing which struck me the most about this, apart from like how perfectly suited it is for like winter reading, is that it goes into things like class and privilege and money, which is something that was, I don't know, kind of sticks out like a sore thumb when you read the Moomins, because it's about these fantasy creatures and they're so bourgeois, but they have all like kind of these middle class luxuries, but like they're always very charitable and they take in people and stuff like that, but there's no kind of labor or working force, or like, I know people aren't meant to think about this when they read the Moomins, but to me it's like kind of blindingly obvious. And the Moomins was originally published in like a socialist magazine, which eventually banned it because they thought it was too bourgeoisie. But yeah, like I love Tove Jansson, but she doesn't really talk about these things while they're sort of very present but also invisible in the Moomin books. So it was just really fascinating to see her finally, I feel like finally tackle those things to some extent in this book. The next award goes to the best myth retelling that I read in 2025. Runner-up is Autobiography of Red, for being like super creative and off the wall, and like just what a interesting way to retell a Greek myth. But the winner is Savage Her Reply by Deirdre Sullivan. This is the second Deirdre Sullivan I've read. She is just like a master of retelling, kind of in a dark feminist way, Irish mythology, or just like myths and fairy tales and folk tales in general for kind of, I guess it's a young adult audience. It's a retelling of the Children of Lear, which is like the Irish folktale. It's like one of the most famous, if not the most famous, Irish folk / fairy tale. It's an interesting thing, like with the folk fairy tale thing. I feel a lot of the Irish myths are now told as folk and fairy tales and not as myths, if that makes sense. Like they're kind of been divorced from the bigger mythological framework of gods and culture and so on, in a way that like the Greek myths haven't. But this book changed that for me. This book situated the Children of Lear, a story that I knew quite well, like into the world of Irish mythology. Like it connected it to so many different characters and thoughts, and introduced so many things that I'd never heard of, that made me really fascinated to like kind of get back to the sources, you know? The story of the Children of Lear is essentially about a wicked stepmother who is also a witch, who gets jealous of her husband's children from his previous marriage, and so she turns them into swans. And that's the gist of the story. This version is told from the perspective of the witch. So like I was a little bit hesitant going in, because we've had so many, you know, like the evil stepmother was actually a goody kind of stories. I find that the sort of goodification of the evil stepmother or evil witch characters from fairy tales makes them more boring. Do you know what I mean? As characters, like a lot of their power comes from their like just being evil, just being simple and evil, and being strong, powerful women who do their evil stuff, right? Whereas in things like Maleficent, or I'm sorry, Madeline Miller lovers, Circe, the witch is made kind of sympathetic by like trying to justify why she was hurt, and so that's why she hurts others, and that just makes her less compelling and more boring and like a normal person, I think. So I'm not into that in general. I like my strong, powerful witches like Medea, and I did find that problem a bit with this book, but there's so much else to like in it that I could kind of overlook it, right? It has the sort of the traditional telling of the Children of Lear in short chapters interspersing with the story from Aoife's point of view, and it's a lot to do with stories and retellings, and why do we retell things the way that we do, and what voices get amplified and what voices get shut out, and why do they get shut out. And actually a lot of the stuff that I really loved about, to bring in Madeline Miller back into it again, Song of Achilles, which isn't just a gay love story. It does go into a lot of like, if I remember rightly, like why do we tell stories the way we do, and like why do we keep telling the same stories again and again. So this kind of like interest in what is a myth retelling, and like why is it worth retelling these old myths in today's world and stuff like that. Also just Deirdre Sullivan has gorgeous prose. She is a good writer on a technical level, so like it's got that going for it too. The next award goes to Best Play Performed in a Quarry. And you can tell that I was struggling with the names of some of these, but this one goes to the performance of Euripides' plays put on by the Athenians in Glorious Exploits by Ferdia Lennon. This is a book which I actually mentioned in my last year's one of these videos. I said it would be on this year's list because I couldn't finish it last year because I had to return to the library or some nonsense like that. But anyway, I did finish it, and it is on this list because it's fantastic. It's retelling a historical event where there was an invasion, a disastrous invasion of Sicily by Greece, by Athens, sorry. The Athenians lost, and a bunch of the Athenians were put into prisoner of war camps and made to work in the quarry basically until they died. And apparently there are like real stories that some of the Athenians were able to get food and so on by reciting bits of Euripides, you know, or bits of plays from the Athenian theater for the Sicilians. This story is based on that. It's about two potters. One of them is like kind of really like artistically minded and loves Homer and so on, and the other one is kind of our main character, and we're in his head. What's he called? Lampo, I think, Yeah, anyway. And he's just like a bit of a fool, really. But yeah, like they decide to, make use of the prisoners of war that are there and put on the plays of Euripides, right? And so in order to do that, obviously they're going to have them fed and make sure they don't die of starvation and so on. And it's all about the power of art to overcome, hatred of another people. And I don't know, like when you say it like that, it sounds super corny. And the thing that is most amazing about this book is that it manages to discuss the themes that it does without being super corny at all, right? Like that's kind of the tension, because when you're reading it, you're like, well, what's going to happen? Are they going to put on the play and then everyone, just sings Kumbaya together? It's like, obviously that's not going to happen. But then what is going to happen? So it's brilliantly like kind of plotted and paced. It's very page turnery. The thing that a lot of people talk about this book is also that it's written in like a kind of Irish English, like a kind of Irish dialect. And for me, that like made this the perfect audiobook, hearing it read in an Irish accent by the writer, Virgil Lennon. It added this humor to it. And it also kind of, I guess, reminds you in a way that whenever we read things in like British English versions of ancient Greece or like American versions of wherever in the world, you know what I mean? It's like, it's always, we're adding in a familiar culture on top of an unfamiliar culture, right? So by adding in the Irishness, like, although in a way it seems kind of alien to us, like it should always feel alien to us, right? Because we're describing a different culture. Anyway, when I tried like picking up the book in a bookshop and reading through it, I found it was difficult because I had to do the work in my head to kind of hear the Irish accent to make the words on the page not look strange to me. So I think this is actually like the perfect audiobook in a way. I listened to it on audiobook and I feel like that was just the perfect way to consume it. But yeah, Glorious Exploits is a glorious book. You don't need to know Euripides to love it. They perform two of his plays. They perform The Trojan Women, which I had read when I read this book, and they perform Medea, which I hadn't read when I read this book, but then I read later on in the year. So that was also kind of an interesting experience. The intertextuality and all that stuff is fascinating. But yeah, you don't need to be a Euripides nerd like I am to get a lot out of this book. The runner-up for Best Fantasy World goes to Babel by R.F. Kuang for her post-colonial dark academia fantasy book set in an alternate Victorian UK. But the winner goes to Made in Abyss volumes 1 to 3, because that's as far as I've read so far in the manga series, by Akihito Tsukushi. This is a manga series where the setting is truly spectacular, both visually, because obviously it's a visual format, so you can see these beautiful drawings of like an amazing fantasy world, but also narratively. So basically the abyss is a big hole in the world, where the further you go down, the more it seems to like expand and turn into a different world, and there's like monsters there and strange magical objects, and people on the surface who are called delvers go down into the abyss to evade monsters and get treasures and bring them back to the world, to get rich or make nations powerful or whatever. The catch is the strains of ascension, I think is what they call it. It's basically what happens when you try to go back up out of the abyss. So if you go down, no problem. But if you try to leave by going back up again, different things happen depending on how far down you've gone. So if you've only gone a little bit in, you'll probably get like nauseous, and just feel like get headaches and so on. If you go further down, your body will deteriorate more to the point that people start going crazy and dying and like blood coming out of every orifice and like it gets really nasty at the lower levels. So there's this sense of like danger, and also the idea of the abyss being something that you can easily fall down into, but much, much, much harder to get back to reality and the real world, is like a kind of philosophical one. And there's something quite like thought-provoking as well about what feels in a way like a children's adventure. The main characters are all children, which adds to that sense of, on the one hand, adventure and optimism and like fun, but on the other hand, dread and worry, because we are like adults reading about children doing things where they're like, yay, going on an adventure in the abyss, and we're just like, things are probably going to go really, really badly for you, and like all the adults are telling you you shouldn't do this, you'll die horribly probably. And yeah, unlike for example Diggers, this one is not for children. It really goes to some pretty terrible places, and like if you're a trigger warning person, then you'll want to read up on this one for sure. The penultimate award is for toughest pregnancy of the year. I read a lot about pregnancy this year, surprisingly. So the runners up are the two that I mentioned earlier, the trembling lady who doesn't have a name from The Black Spider, her pregnancy, and obviously Rosemary from Rosemary's Baby. But the winner is Takiko from Woman Running in the Mountains by Yuko Tsushima. Really, this is like the most ordinary of the pregnancies. The other ones, you know, they've got black magic, they've got like, you know, whole communities who are like trying to mess up the pregnancy. They're very dramatic books, right, with fantasy elements and stuff. This one is like about, I think she's a teenager, or at least a very young woman who doesn't have a very supportive family in 1970s Japan. That's an understatement. Like her dad's like abusive, and her mother is not very helpful, and her brother is kind of absent. But anyway, like, yeah, and she just gets pregnant and decides to keep the baby, and she wants to do everything by herself, and she soon realizes that that's kind of impossible. And the pregnancy isn't like for the whole book, it's just for the beginning of it, but it's very memorable. Like there's lots of things, just like being pregnant, but also having to think about a nursery school that the kid will have to go to, and then like which one to go, and finding that they're all full up and that you should have booked actually months in advance, and not having a partner as well to help, because the father of the baby doesn't even know it's his. He's moved to a different part of the country, so she's really kind of on her own with her body and the fetus that's growing inside of her. And there's just something extremely like intimate and gritty and realistic about that. This one also has some lists, like the Miyako Kanai novel. In like one chapter we get just like a lot of lists of, you know, like taking care of the baby, so at what time the baby eats, what time the baby poops, all this stuff. Like it just, that takes up like a few pages, and again, like there's something about the rhythm of it which makes it like quite interesting to read. In a way, and the way that it intersperses with daily life, these kind of rhythmic patterns of taking care of the kid. I think this was also the most mysterious book of the year. Tsushima's writing is to die for. She uses flashbacks and dream sequences in ways which make like kind of reality and unreality overlap in a way which, at the same time as being slightly confusing, also feels like super realistic, you know, like I said, kind of gritty and realistic. And, you know, I don't know how she does it. That's why it's mysterious to me. And I don't remember a lot of what actually happens in this book, except that it has this sort of mystical quality to it. And finally, the moment you've all been waiting for, the award for most toxic throuple of the year goes to Lee, Buzz, and Annabelle from Love by Angela Carter. I did a whole video on this book and these three misfit characters living together in a small apartment in like 1960s England. And just like getting on each other's nerves. I think it's like, it's got like a lot of humor and a lot of horror, and it's written in very decadent language. I read somewhere like, don't be fooled by the title, in like some review of it or something. It was a positive review, but still, like, I think on the contrary, it really earns the title of Love. The second half was not as good as the first half, I will say, and like I give it 4 out of 5 stars. It was still the most surprising and like the book that made the most impression on me. Like, so in that sense, I guess it's probably my book of 2025. That's it. We're done. Award season is officially closed for now, at least on this channel. Let me know down in the comments if you've read any of these, if you're interested in any of these, or what was your favorite book of 2025. I'd love to hear about it. I'll catch you in the next video. Bye.